Emma Whitaker was an honor student. Melissa Whitaker was a beloved schoolteacher. Richard Whitaker was a quiet man with no enemies. Together, they were the perfect family, until all three were found dead inside their Indiana home without a single sign of struggle. What began as a routine welfare check would uncover a chilling secret hidden within the walls, one that turned a quiet home into the state's most disturbing crime scene. For years, Hollow Creek Lane had been the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about. Perfectly paved sidewalks, neatly mowed lawns, and families who waved to each other every morning. The kind of place where garage doors stayed open during the day and kids left their bikes on the front lawn without fear. Life there moved quietly and predictably. Nothing bad ever happened in Hollow Creek, or so everyone thought. The Whitaker family lived in a modest 2-story brick home at the end of the cul-de-sac. Richard Whitaker, a soft-spoken insurance adjuster in his mid-40s, was known for his polite nods and quiet demeanor. His wife, Melissa, was the type of woman who always had a smile ready. She taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school and baked cookies for school events. Their daughter, Emma, had just turned 17. Bright and kind, she often walked neighbors' dogs after school and helped elderly residents with groceries. To the outside world, the Whitakers were a picture of peace and stability. They moved into the neighborhood 4 years ago and almost immediately became a fixture in the community. Their home was always tidy, their lawn carefully trimmed, and their windows often glowing warmly in the evenings. Halloween decorations in October, twinkling lights in December, it all painted the portrait of a perfect family living a quiet life. That's why, when things began to feel off, it took people a while to notice. It started small. A missed trash pickup, a dark house at night. Then came the missed school days. Emma hadn't shown up for her classes 2 days in a row. Melissa hadn't been seen on her daily morning walks for nearly a week. At first, neighbors assumed they were out of town. But the mailbox was overflowing. A newspaper remained untouched. On the porch for days. A neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, finally walked over and knocked, but no one answered. The cars were still in the driveway. The lights hadn't come on in days. On the morning of February 12th, after Emma failed to show up for her volunteer shift at the animal shelter and Melissa didn't appear at school, a concerned school employee called the police for a welfare check. Officers arrived just after noon. At first, everything seemed normal. No signs of forced entry. No broken glass. Nothing out of place. The house was quiet. Too quiet. What they found inside left them shaken. Within minutes of entering the home, officers radioed for backup. The Whitaker home, once full of warmth and comfort, had become a silent graveyard. Each family member was found dead in separate rooms. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of a break-in. It looked as if they had simply stopped living. The discovery shocked the entire neighborhood. The street that had always been peaceful was now crawling with crime scene vans, flashing lights, and investigators. News cameras soon followed. Hollow Creek Lane would never be the same again. The Whitaker family, once the heart of the block, had become the center of Indiana's most chilling mystery. The first responders who entered the Whitaker home on February 12th had no idea what they were walking into. From the outside, everything appeared undisturbed. The cars were parked neatly. In the driveway, the front door was locked. The grass, though slightly overgrown, gave no clues. It wasn't until officers stepped inside that the disturbing truth began to unfold. The house was eerily still. No pets. No noise. No movement. The living room looked almost staged, cushions perfectly aligned, a half-burned candle on the side table, and a glass of water resting beside a closed book. There was no sign of a struggle. No broken furniture. Nothing smashed or overturned. In fact, the stillness made it worse. As if time had stopped inside the walls, Richard Whitaker was the first to be found. He was in the master bedroom, fully dressed, lying flat on his back with his eyes open. There were no visible injuries, no blood, and no indication of trauma. Just a lifeless body in a bed that looked untouched. His phone sat on the nightstand, untouched since the evening before. Melissa was discovered next, just down the hallway. Her body was curled on its side at the top of the stairs, as though she had simply laid down and never got up again. And then there was Emma. Her room looked like any teenager's: books on the shelf, clothes on a chair, school backpack half unzipped. She was found collapsed on the floor next to her desk, her laptop still lit, the screen displaying a half-written English paper. Paramedics confirmed what officers already suspected. All 3 family members were dead. But how and why was still unclear. There were no signs of foul play. No wounds. No blood. No overdose. Toxicology would take time, but nothing obvious pointed to a cause. What unnerved investigators even more was the complete absence of any struggle. Whatever had happened, it had unfolded quietly and without resistance. Crime scene analysts combed through the home, inch by inch. They looked for fingerprints that didn't belong, signs of forced entry, hidden passageways, anything. But the windows were locked from the inside. The doors were secure. Nothing was missing. Jewelry sat untouched in Melissa's drawer. Cash remained in the kitchen cabinet. Expensive electronics had not been taken. This was not a robbery. If anything, it felt more intimate, more personal. Detectives began interviewing neighbors. Most had seen nothing. A few reported not hearing from the family in several days. One neighbor recalled seeing Emma through her window late at night, pacing her room. Another mentioned a light flickering strangely in the basement 2 nights before the police arrived. But nothing concrete stood out. The house was sealed off for investigation. The coroner began his work. Detectives reviewed surveillance footage from surrounding homes, but the street was quiet. Nothing suspicious. No strange vehicles. No masked figures caught on camera. It was as though the Whitakers had simply died, without a sound, without a struggle, and without a trace of who, or what, had done it. As the investigation deepened, detectives turned to digital evidence in hopes of finding anything that might explain the sudden and silent deaths of the Whitaker family. Their devices were collected: phones, laptops, tablets, even the home's smart thermostat and doorbell camera were pulled for analysis. It was Emma's laptop that first caught investigators' attention. While her final essay appeared incomplete, buried beneath standard school files and photos was a hidden folder titled simply Notes. Inside were dozens of text documents, scribbled thoughts, strange drawings, and unnerving diary-like entries that painted a very different picture of life in the Whitaker home. Emma had been keeping a record of things she noticed, things she couldn't explain. Missing food. Unlocked doors she was sure had been closed. Objects slightly out of place in her room. She had begun to suspect that someone was coming into the house when they weren't home. At first, she thought it was paranoia. But over time, her notes grew darker. She wrote about the sound of footsteps at night, cold drafts from vents, and a strange feeling of being watched, especially in the basement. In one entry, she mentioned a shadow that passed behind her while she was on a video call, even though no one else was home. She referred to someone only as H. There were no clear clues to who, or what, H might be. In some entries, H seemed like a real person. In others, more like a presence. One file stood out. It was a list of dates and times, each marked with a single word: noise, cold. Missing, saw. The most recent entry was just 3 days before the bodies were found. It read, "He's in the walls." Disturbed by what they had found, police decided to conduct a second, more thorough search of the house, this time bringing in specialists. A structural engineer joined the team to examine the layout, and attention soon turned to the basement. It was unfinished, cluttered with old furniture and storage boxes. At first, nothing seemed unusual, until one of the officers noticed a draft behind the water heater. Further inspection revealed a false panel in the wall, expertly cut and disguised behind stacked paint cans. When removed, it exposed a narrow crawl space that extended beyond the foundation of the house. Inside were signs of recent human activity: a sleeping bag, discarded food wrappers, empty water bottles, and even a small flashlight. The space was barely large enough for someone to sit up, but it had clearly been used for some time. More chilling than the discovery itself was the realization that the crawlspace had direct access to the home's air vents. Whoever had been hiding there could listen to every conversation, every moment of silence, every movement. They had been living inside the Whitaker home, undetected. Forensic teams swept the space for prints and DNA. A single partial fingerprint was recovered from a vent cover near Emma's room. It didn't match any of the 3 victims. Someone else had been there, watching, waiting, and now they were gone. The partial fingerprint found in the crawlspace was the first real lead in an otherwise confounding case. When run through national databases, it matched a man named Noah Whitaker, Richard Whitaker's estranged son from a previous marriage. Until that moment, not a single person involved in the investigation knew that Richard had another child. There were no photographs of Noah in the house, no mention in Emma's diary entries, and no signs that he had ever been a part of the family's life in Hollow Creek Lane. To most, it was as if he never existed. Noah had last been seen nearly 3 years earlier, when he was discharged from a psychiatric facility in rural Illinois. Records indicated a long history of mental health issues, beginning in his late teens. He had been hospitalized several times for violent outbursts, delusions, and obsessive behavior. His relationship with Richard had reportedly collapsed years before that. According to medical files and old police records, Noah blamed his father for abandoning him after remarrying Melissa and replacing him with a new family. After his release, he disappeared. No forwarding address, no employment records, no bank activity. It was as if he vanished into thin air. Until now, detectives believed Noah had returned with a singular purpose: to observe, infiltrate, and destroy the life he believed had been stolen from him. The evidence in the crawlspace painted a haunting picture. Analysts determined that someone had been living in the walls of the home for weeks, possibly even months. The wrappers, empty bottles, and candle stubs found in the hidden space suggested a careful, methodical routine. This wasn't a random act of madness. It was premeditated. Neighbors were interviewed again, this time with Noah's photo in hand. A few recalled seeing a strange man walking near the wooded area behind the neighborhood late at night, but no one had thought much of it. One man believed he saw the same person rummaging through his recycling bin several weeks prior, but didn't report it. It was the kind of face you forget, quiet, expressionless, seemingly harmless. The working theory took shape. Noah had been watching the Whitakers from the shadows, likely for weeks before entering the home. He may have first broken in while they were away, finding access through the basement or garage. From there, he built a space in the crawl area behind the walls and began his life as a hidden occupant. The crawl space connected to air ducts and vents that gave him a clear line of sight and sound into almost every room. Investigators now suspected that Emma had begun to sense something was wrong, writing about her experiences with growing unease. They believed she may have come close to discovering Noah's presence, which could have triggered a final, violent act. What remained unclear was how he had killed the family without signs of struggle or injury. Toxicology reports were still pending, but foul play was certain. Noah had vanished once more. But now, police had a name, a face, and a motive. The hunt was no longer about figuring out what had happened inside the Whitaker home. It was about finding who had been there all along. The search for Noah Whitaker extended across state lines. As law enforcement released his photo to the public and issued alerts to surrounding jurisdictions, his name dominated headlines. The forgotten son, the phantom intruder, the man suspected of living inside his family's home undetected for weeks, or even longer. The bizarre nature of the case kept investigators and the public on edge. Tips poured in, most of them dead ends, until a truck driver in rural Ohio called in a sighting. The driver had stopped at a remote gas station around midnight when he noticed a disheveled young man walking barefoot along the shoulder of the highway, clutching a backpack. His clothes were torn, his eyes distant. Something about the man unsettled the driver. especially after seeing a news segment just hours earlier. Authorities responded quickly and found the man in question asleep under an overpass, curled in a fetal position. It was Noah. Inside his backpack were basic supplies, trail mix, bottled water, a change of clothes, and something far more disturbing: a worn, leather-bound diary. It was filled with entries written in jagged, uneven handwriting. Investigators described it as both a confession and a manifesto. Noah had documented his time in the walls of the Whitaker home, the thoughts that consumed him, and his growing hatred for the life his father had rebuilt without him. He referred to Richard, Melissa, and Emma not by name, but as the imposters. In the final pages, he detailed the night of February 9th. He wrote about slipping something into the family's food supply, an odorless, tasteless substance he had found online that, when consumed in large quantities, could lead to paralysis and death. He described watching them grow weaker over the course of a day, losing control of their limbs, their speech, their breath. He called it taking the silence back. There was no emotion in his writing, only a strange, obsessive calm though. Arrested without resistance, Noah was quickly declared unfit to stand trial. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with severe delusional disorder and paranoid schizophrenia, compounded by years of untreated trauma and isolation. He was committed to a high-security psychiatric hospital where he remains under constant observation. The Whitaker house was eventually released back to the extended family. Its walls were torn open during the investigation, exposing the hidden crawl spaces where Noah had lived. The house was sold quietly months later to new owners who asked for the entire interior to be gutted and rebuilt. Most of the neighbors along Hollow Creek Lane put their homes on the market soon after. Even today, years later, the story of the Whitaker family remains one of Indiana's darkest and most unsettling mysteries. What made it so haunting wasn't just the method or the motive, but how ordinary it all seemed from the outside. A loving family, a quiet street, a peaceful home. But beneath that calm surface was a horror no one saw coming. Because sometimes, the danger isn't breaking in. Sometimes, it's already inside, watching, waiting, and listening.